Hello, I'm LegenTerry, and this is Redfall, a vampire-slaying looter-shooter with co-op multiplayer elements. It was developed by Arcane Austin and published by Bethesda Softworks. I spent roughly 4 hours with Redfall. 4 long hours. Enough time to tell me everything I needed to know about this game. What I'm trying to get across is that it ain't very good, folks. Redfall is one of the most mundane, unexciting, and technically challenged games I have endured in a long time. If my talking points seem a little scattered on this one, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to categorize things neatly because there are just so many awful things in this game that combine with each other to make even bigger messes. The setup for the story isn't terrible, it's just fine. The quaint little seaside town of Redfall, Massachusetts was perfectly normal until people started going missing and rumors of blood-sucking cryptids started to spread. At night, vampires began murdering the townsfolk, and when survivors attempted to escape via boat, the vampires used water-shaping magic to turn the seas into an inescapable death trap. Some people abandoned all reason and began sacrificing their fellow humans to the vampires in hopes that they would be spared. You, playing as one of 4 selectable heroes, were aboard one of the boats that got tossed back ashore when you attempted to get out. You wake up to see a couple of vampires sucking a nearby corpse dry, but before they can approach you, they make way for a third queen-like vampire. She remarks about you being useful to her just as the sun rises and drives her away. You're left to skulk back into town, where you band together with other survivors to reclaim a firehouse and plan countermeasures. There are some mysteries set up about cover-up conspiracies and plans being made by outside forces, but that's pretty much all you need to know. You're able to use some supernatural abilities or craft impossible machinery depending on your character choice, but it isn't really explained at the start. You can just kind of do it for some inexplicable reason and nobody asks any questions. I booted up this game with a friend of mine because he had already started playing overnight and misery loves company. I was immediately greeted with a screen saying that I had to log into or make a Bethesda account to play the game. Redfall is always online and apparently you just aren't allowed to play unless you give them data. That's strike number 1. Getting into a multiplayer lobby wasn't difficult, but the progression system raises many questions and red flags. For starters, only the host retains progress for their campaign mission. Anyone else who joins is just expected to be playing solely for loot and for levels. It's supposed to be an untethered co-op game where you can go wherever you want while the other person is separated from you, but that's not at the systems level. It just means that you don't need to be directly beside your teammates during missions like you would in the first Halo campaign. Anytime you want to do something, like begin a cutscene or interact with an important object, you need to be present or the game simply doesn't let you. Strike number 2. At launch, the game is locked to 30 FPS on console. Strike number 3, and we haven't even got to touch the controller yet. It is not a showcase for the power of Xbox Series X in any way, shape, or form. The graphical fidelity hits around the same quality you would expect from other Arcane games, so why this one in particular is stuck with less than stellar frame rates when Deathloop came out at 60 a little under 2 years ago is beyond me. And you are going to feel every bit of that missing smoothness as you play through Redfall. The controls are about as stiff and unyielding as you can get. You can adjust aiming sensitivity, but not stick dead zones, so tilting slightly does nothing. You can only swivel your head at near maximum speeds. This makes aiming weapons feel like a futile, frustrating chore. If you're seeing this footage and thinking to yourself, wow, this looks super jerky and bad. Yeah, that's because it is. The game also expects you to be pinpoint accurate when looting items off the ground, as you have to highlight them with your reticle to get the prompt. It's almost like nothing was learned from the Borderlands series. Speaking of picking things up, sometimes the button to do so just decides not to work at all. In fact, a lot of the buttons tend to do this. The most basic functionality that is required of this game didn't work about half of the times I tried for the first 20 minutes I played. I need to know, how is that even a possibility? The shooting is bad, the looting and the controls are broken. What else could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, plenty. When you actually manage to pick up a weapon and equip it, you'll notice that every weapon archetype feels unremarkable. Besides maybe the stake launcher, which is capable of one-shotting just about every enemy in the game. Besides the starter pistol and the shotgun they give you, the first weapon I happened to find was a burst fire assault rifle. I mean, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? You pull the trigger and a few rounds pop off. Nope. If you press the trigger, you might fire off 1 or maybe 2 rounds. You have to actually hold the trigger down to fire the entire burst of 3, and then release it and hold it again to fire another burst. What kind of insane person designed this system? The rest of the guns are pretty unbalanced from one another. Besides your inability to hit anything with them, when you do manage to get lucky, their damage and use varies drastically and the ammo economy is pointlessly punishing. For example, let's take that burst fire rifle and compare it to a shotgun of the same level. If I was able to hit all 3 headshots in a burst, most of the time I was rewarded with an instant kill, or at least it got close enough at longer ranges. If I barrel stuffed an enemy point blank with the shotgun, I was lucky if I killed my target in less than 4 blasts. The few other types of weapons I saw were pretty generic ones like full auto assault rifles and semi-auto or bolt action sniper rifles. The only really creative addition to your arsenal is a UV gun, which blasts your target with a beam of harsh sunlight. I didn't bother trying it on humans, but I did against vampires, which you would assume is their primary use case. I was extremely confused with this, as shooting a vampire with it literally didn't do anything. You have to track your enemy with a beam and hold it to them, and then eventually they'll get petrified by the light and turn to stone. Then you can whittle away at their health with other weapons while they remain helplessly stationary. The only problem with that is that vampires move so erratically that keeping the UV gun trained on them is nearly impossible with the aiming controls. It also feels pointless when you could just shoot and kill most of them by the time you manage to petrify them. Maybe it's stronger against bigger boss type vampires, but I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I really hope that you'll stick around long enough to see my next video by clicking that subscribe button down below. The world of Redfall feels like an empty wasteland. You can walk for what feels like half of a mile before encountering any enemies, even at night. Most of the time you'll see pockets of maybe 3 or 4 dudes standing around doing nothing, completely and blissfully unaware of your presence until you step within a narrow cone of vision a few feet away. When you're finally spotted, they'll start shooting, but these guys are about as effective at hitting their targets as stormtroopers. Humans feel like they pose very little threat at all unless you're stuck in a hallway with them. But nobody cares about those guys, it's all about the vampires. There are a few variants of vampires you'll see scattered around town. The most common ones will target you and sprint forwards, using only melee attacks while occasionally teleporting around. These guys have the same problem. A simple strafe to one side or the other, and their only combat tactic basically becomes useless unless they're part of a larger group. Once dealt with, they enter a stun state where their chest glows, ready for a staking. A few other types I encountered were similarly dull fights. Bloodbags are engorged vampires that explode when they get close to you or when you shoot them at close range. They're pretty easy to pick off from a range and aren't really fast enough or smart enough to catch up to you. I fought a couple other types, but those were more like mini bosses and they were boring to fight too. The first real boss fight takes place in the basement of a movie theater and is like the most annoying game of hide and seek ever played. She traps you in the super awkward looking purple bubble that tracks your movement, turns into smoke to get away from you, and then only pops back up to throw balls of energy. They aren't hard to avoid and they barely do damage, but it's annoying that you can't tell when one is coming unless you happen to get close enough to see her, because she can pop up outside of that awkward purple bubble. So why are you fighting against these guys in the first place anyways? Because Redfall has missions, some of the most egregiously mediocre missions of any video game. When you visit the second floor of the firehouse and approach the table, you're presented with a set of missions. After the opening of the game, these split off into 3 different directions, and you can choose to tackle them in any order. This is probably the only thing I can really praise about the mission structure. Everything else is bland, vapid legwork that the devs put little effort into. They give you nothing interesting at all to do. It's either go here and kill a thing, or go here and do a thing, and then fast travel back to the firehouse to pick up the next uninteresting mission. One of the most mind-boggling examples of this is available right at the start. A doctor tells you that he wants you to take his recently deceased father's pocket watch and lay it at his mother's grave so that they can be with each other symbolically. So you go to the grave and you put the watch on top of it, and that's the entire mission. If you want to spice things up, you're then encouraged to steal the pocket watch as soon as you put it down because it will give you a buff to your health. And there's no consequence for doing so. The 5 minutes you just spent walking to the graveyard are immediately nullified by the person who designed the mission. Why are they actually trying to waste your time? But let's roll it back a few moments. When you choose a mission to pursue, the game presents the plot in the form of a motionless scene stitched together with some voiceover. That's right, they didn't even bother to animate the cutscenes. I can almost guarantee with 100% certainty that this was not a stylistic choice. This is lazy and unfinished, and I can't believe that they thought this was okay to ship. To me, it screams that they had no idea what they were doing with the game until very late into development. The other types of missions come from safe houses, places where someone has stashed an ammunition crate and a map showing local disturbances that need to be thwarted. The first time I attempted one of these, it was a vampire encased in crystal gathering blood bags for a grand sacrifice. When you get close to the marker, a timer begins, and you have to kill as many of the approaching blood bags as possible before time runs out. After a minute or two, the cultists jumped in and started shooting me as well. I ran out of medkits and managed to accidentally kill myself with a blood bag explosion in the last few seconds of the timer, sending me back to the safe house. When I returned to the location, the objective changed to kill the vampire boss, except that the boss was nowhere to be found. The safe house mission bugged out and now I'm unable to complete it. If you haven't noticed yet, Redfall isn't exactly the most stable game when it comes to bugs and glitches. I've seen plenty more besides the previously mentioned ones, including vampires teleporting into walls, vampires becoming invincible and not noticing you, player models duplicating at the end of cutscenes, player models A-posing, NPC dialogue interjecting itself between conversations, delays in voice lines and character reactions, extreme frame dips when using a stake to finish off a vampire, and the list goes on and on. The enemy AI in Redfall also practically doesn't exist. For example, check this out. I use a stake launcher on a vampire who's hovering above a rooftop while his friend stands by doing nothing. Then he teleports, leading me to believe that he noticed that I shot his friend and is coming to attack, but then, poof, he zips right back to the same spot and he's completely unfazed. And here's another. There's a locked bedroom in the house of a dead TV repairman, and when you find the key and open the door, there's just a vampire hanging out there floating inside. And he doesn't notice you opening the door 6 inches to his right. So I just line up a shot from my stake launcher and kill him, and then loot the room of any valuables and walk out. I saw a couple groups of people fighting and thought, wait, are there friendly humans in the world? Why are they fighting each other? So I kill all of the cultists by walking up directly behind them and hosing them down. Then I walk forwards thinking maybe these military looking guys can be interacted with because they stopped shooting when all the cultists died. One of them walks directly in front of me while the others just run by. Then he spends a couple of seconds setting up a turret directly in front of my face with no warning. Once I saw that, I realized, nope, of course there isn't any interaction with humans outside the main firehouse hub. That would take actual effort. And what do you get for your efforts in Redfall? Basically nothing. The loot that you want, the guns, are all very samey and barely have any different functionality within the same archetype. You might get additional damage to petrified targets or extra accuracy for a kill, but these barely factor into the core gameplay. The standard multicolored rarity system is at play here, with whites being bog standard and yellows being unique. Aside from the starting shotgun, I never saw any other unique guns drop. In fact, you'll hardly see anything drop, as most weapons come from the trunks of cars, which are seemingly perpetually glitched to always appear open, or from chests that infrequently show up inside buildings or enemy-held territory. The rest of the loot that you get is actual trash that you scrap for money, which seems to have no use besides restocking ammo or buying worse guns than you already own from a vendor at the firehouse. There are also food items that I don't think you can do anything with, at least not to the point that I played. You only recover health using medkits, so I have no idea what purpose picking up food items serves. Redfall is an absolute bloodbath that never comes to grips with what it wants to be or why it even exists. It feels like a game designed halfway by committee with all the buzzwords like live service, and designed halfway with the original intent to be a narrative-focused single-player FPS. It continues a concerning pattern of underbaked games released for the current generation of consoles that don't bode well for the future of Arcane, Bethesda, or the Xbox brand. I really hope these companies figure out some kind of positive direction to lean into soon, or all the good faith they have left will be squandered. Redfall is not worth your money, and definitely not worth your time. It might be on Game Pass, but I'm telling you now that you shouldn't even bother unless you're desperate for a below-average experience.